this is the Donbas Pass, which is at the north end of the valley of it's the Gudbrandsdal Valley. And the Donbas Pass was very important early on, and there was always a road from Trondheim to Oslo. And it took us 7 hours to get there on the train, so that was, it was a long way to maintain a road in very early days. But anyway, this is the Gudbrandsdal Valley, and it's also called the Uplands. Okay, so the reason that that this is important to us is that we are descended from the Earls of Orkney, and the earliest known the Norse line of the Earls of Orkney, and the earliest of them was Ivar Uplendinga-Jarl. And Ivar Uplendinga-Jarl means Earl of the Uplands. And this is the Uplands of Norway. So this is where Ivar was from. And he was born about 770. And so, anyway, so these are just pictures of that we took from the train. So, then, what really drove all of my research is two questions. Why did they move? Was it for land or opportunity or religion, or because they killed their goat? And how did a person living at that time acquire a position of prominence, like Finn Arneson or Ivar Uplendinga-Jarl? How did they get to be somebody that was known? I think America, really, we don't appreciate it, but it's one of the first places in the world that you can start from nothing and be somebody. But back then, you pretty much had to inherit a lot of your importance in order to get jobs of importance. So I just keep wondering, how did people know who this family was back then? How do we know who they were? So anyway, those are my questions. And Dan Speer from California respectfully suggested to me this week that it is Providence. And I'm a Presbyterian. So it was sort of embarrassing. But anyway, so there we are. And then, only one more thing. Ivar Uplendinga-Jarl was son of Halfdan the Old. And Ivar's son was Halfdan the Black. And that was pretty remarkable. He had black hair, and that was remarkable back then because most of the Norse people were blonde, you know, so. Anyway, Halfdan the Black had a dream. It seemed to him that he had the longest hair of any man, and that this hair was all in ringlets, some touching the ground, some reaching the middle of his leg, some to his knees, some to his hip or the middle, some reaching no further than his neck, while some sprouted out of his skull like little horns. But his curls were of all colors, with one lock exceeding all others in beauty and brightness and length. And he related this dream to Thorleif, who interpreted it in this way, that a line of great descendants would come from him, and they would govern the land with great distinction, though not all equally so. So there you have it. I mean, you're really relieved that that's pretty. Oh, okay. Geez, I did forget just one thing. So the Ivar Uplendinga-Jarl was also descended from the most noble family of Ynglings, as described in the Heims Kringlød by Snorri Sturluson. The Ynglings came up in eastern Sweden and also lived in Gotland. So we had to go to Gotland. So this is the city of Visby in northern Gotland. And before the Vikings ever harried the British Isles or northern France, they went east to trade. And they went down the Volga River and the Dnieper River and the western Dvina River. And they went to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, and they went to Christian Constantinople and to the Muslims of northern Africa. And they traded lumber, they traded amber, they traded tools and arrows, dried fish, furs, all kinds of things. But mostly what they got back was silver. And on Gotland, there have been 700 hoards of silver found so far, dug up on, and it's just a little island. So when we went to the museum, we got to see the hoards of silver, some of them. And they were very wealthy. And one of the things they had on the island was salt. And people had to pay whatever the price for salt because everybody needed it. So these were very wealthy people. And they were illiterate. And this was like 700 or before, maybe 200 to 700. They were illiterate, but they had picture stones they left, and which told about their way of life. And one of these, the next picture, tells, it's the only thing they have left, the only picture that they have left that shows how a Viking ship was rigged. And then there were burial stones that had Pictish language on them, rune stones. And this rune stone, burial stone, tells about the man that's buried there, about his life. So they weren't completely illiterate because they did have their language. But this is very early. This is like prehistory, isn't it?
Pardon me?
The Pictish people were real early.
Yeah, Pictish are like natives.
Yeah, so this was very early. But anyway, two things that were being carried on in the Iron Age there were that they were working on iron tools and so forth, and they were working on textiles. They were weaving. And so when James and Robert come to America, Robert is the weaver, and James' family formed U.S. Steel in the Wheeling Valley, and also the city of Pittsburgh. They were bankers. So, but anyway, I'm just saying two of these early crafts came through. I don't know if that had any bearing at all, but it was of interest to me. So that's it. I'm really done with one. Thank you. I thought about trying to make that shorter. I could not figure out how. So it's just me.
You have to have a smaller family for that.
Thank you so much. Lynn, I'm just overwhelmed by the numbers that you quote. And it's just a privilege for us to be here with you. And a privilege for you to talk. It's just amazing. I think we should take a break. Tom, you have something.
Can I just say one quick thing about this program booklet? Feel free to take them if you know of people who aren't here that you think might want to see it. Take them and send it to them. That's its purpose. I put this together in terms of trying to centralize the activities of the day. If you haven't looked in detail, there's the schedule for the day is on page 3. And I also want to point out a mistake. On the back cover in the upper right-hand corner, it says 5 sons of Robert. That is not correct. They would be the 5 grandsons of Robert or the 5 sons of Stuart. So if you didn't get one where the word Robert is marked out, just be aware that that's not correct.
What would you like me to write in this place?
Well, it could be either 5 grandsons of Robert or 5 sons of Stuart. Either would be correct.
You know that Tom put this book together with enormous skill from enormous masses of material, came up with it less than a week ago.
We'll take a break and come right back and
Underground Railroad, and he made a list, a handwritten list of the slaves that had passed through his part of the Underground Railroad, and I am in possession of that list now, and I have made copies of it, but I have the original, which is kind of very flimsy, on very flimsy paper, but I have this list, that if anybody wanted to copy, they could, you know. But it had back and front this list of the slaves.
And read one or two of the names off it, just so you can get the flavor of the names.
The first
This
one
says October 15th, one man, Jeff Jones, with no feet. No feet.
So he had tried that before, and somebody,
March 1842, March 20th, Richard Smith, who, when they were in the act of handcuffing to send him back, got hold of his axe and ran off. Stuff like that. There's a story that my dad told that one time his grandmother was out was out in hanging clothes up, and she had the clothes in a basket, and she heard horses coming, and she knew that meant trouble, and she had a little slave child out there with her, and she immediately pulled the clothes out of the basket, put the child in there, put the clothes on top of the child, and he was quiet, and they didn't find them. So that's the only story I really know about that. But that's been just a kind of an interesting thing from our history.
Wow.
That was in the house in New Concord that was up on the hill.
That was Stewart's house?
No, it wasn't Stewart's house. It was
West of
Robert West.
Okay.
He was the brother of Stewart. Was he?
No,
he was.
no, William was the brother.
William, it was.
He was William the blacksmith.
Yeah,
Okay.
I
It was
don't
his
know whether
house.
William lived in that house, but Robert West did, and then his son did, and my dad grew up in that house, so.
Good. Tom?
I would like to mention this book. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, this book was written by a professor at Muskingum College named Lorley Porter. It's almost as though the Speer family commissioned it. I mean, I went through it once and I put sticky notes on every page where a Speer was mentioned, and it looked like it was all sticky notes. But the Speers were very prominent in that 1810 to 1850 period in eastern central Ohio. That's where the clan migrated, and that's where they had all these, taverns and underground railroad houses and all these things that Lynn showed pictures of. So I highly recommend this to people interested in that, portion of the Speer family history. There's a copy in the back. You can see that I bought these on Amazon.com, but it's just, several people said, boy, I got that, and they couldn't put it down for 4 or 5 hours. Just read right through it. So
What's the cost?
somewhere in the neighborhood of $20.
Oh, no.
I don't remember.
It's a hardback book, I mean, no more pricey or less pricey than any other
Yeah,
big book like that.
Just
About 800
fascinating.
pages though, it's a lot of reading.
Well, much of the back of it is Civil War, which that's a different chapter. But the front part of it is Eastern Central Ohio, and the title is "A People Set Apart." They were very clannish Presbyterian Covenanters that the basis of the family that came from Robert and Stewart.
We tried to get the author of the book to come to speak to us today, but she had a conflict. When I talked to her about coming, she called back a couple days later and said, no, her brother said, no, you need to come to a reunion that we're having in Florida. So
It's reunion weekend.
So anyway, we missed out on having.
And the page from the Robert West Speer diary that Ann just mentioned is in this book as well.
Anybody else? Robert?
Just
Bobby?
Yeah, just a moment with reference to the cemetery maintenance. When you see the gravesite this afternoon, if you haven't seen it, you'll see how wonderfully this cemetery is maintained. It's the cemetery of the church building we're going to also visit. And by the way, since I have a moment, we'll get to the cemetery, rededicate the grave, And then on the way back, we're invited to stop in the church, which went up in the 1790s. Pastor Williams has invited us to stop in the church, which for my sake and for anyone else, it's a rest stop as well. So we'll be able to stop there. And you'll see that that church maintains this cemetery. And this family is going to have a chance to say what we think about that. And I'm going to present a check on my account, just because that's the simplest way to do it, to Pastor Dale Williams at the supper tonight in a certain amount of dollars. Now, I'd be glad to tell you privately what that number of dollars is going to be, and I would be glad to receive your subscriptions to this Memorial Cemetery Maintenance Fund. My address is contained in Tom's booklet, and I will tell you privately what the minimum, what page?
2.
2. And I'll tell you privately, I don't want to talk numbers, but I will personally talk numbers, and if it goes over that amount, which I'm pretty sure it's going to, just keep the money coming. I will consolidate it and send it to Pastor Dale Williams. Now say that better, Tom, if you, I'm sure you can, but yeah, please.
You said it perfectly.
Please give it in honor of Robert and Jane.
On the check.
Yes, in honor of Robert and Jane Speer.
Please do that. Please do
No,
that.
I mean, when you give the money to him, to the church, I'd like for them to know that it's in honor of Robert and Jane.
And tonight at the meal, you'll help me do that. What you're exactly saying is what I exactly need to hear.
Yeah, you know,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think we're on board.
And who should they specifically give money to here? Is that?
Hand me a check.
IOU, right?
Made out to me, to Robert H. Speer. That's the best way to pass it through my personal account. I will fence off all of the amounts. It's about, aside from opening a separate checking account for this drill, which I don't think it's necessary, hand the checks to me. And we will give an honor roll of contributors later on, Kate, in some kind of email, so we'll know what's going on, yeah?
Okay.
And I'll tell you,
How about the gravestone cost? Do we need to participate in that?
thank you for the flat stone.
Uh-huh.
Thank you for that. I would like to have taken care of that myself.
Okay.
What's at work in that flat gravestone is that the only company that's allowed in that cemetery is Kadori Memorials, because of their masterful class with which they do their work. So they did the work, they put it down, we met the specifications of it being required to be mown over by a lawnmower. So it's flat and meets all the specifications. But as you'll notice that the existing stones, which are a little bit teetery but several solid, you can touch them, are practically illegible short of using crayons and tissue paper and tracing them. So we thought, what a good idea. You can see Tom's photograph, you can see what it looks like. That's the stone you're referring to.
Yes.
And that gives people, so thanks for asking. I think we're good on that. I think that.
Okay, in lieu of that, then contributions.
Let's regard that as taken care of,
Okay.
and the monetary amounts that go to the
Okay.
further contributions in honor of Robert and Jane Speer will go to that cemetery. It's John Moser who mows the lawn there, but the parish is responsible forever to maintain that thing. So we good?
Okay.
Thank you.
You know, we're videotaping the talk, particularly of what Lynn had this morning and talk of Tim Smith this evening. But if you want to get copies of that for yourself or friends, contact Kate and Jeff, really, and work directly with them about something like that.
I have a question. I'm fascinated by the Speer history of Central Ohio, and one of the things that comes out of that is the quasi-relationship with President Buchanan. Could somebody here who really knows what happened tell us about that?
Yeah, I
Lynn?
mentioned, Robert Speer, our Robert, and his brother James came from Northern Ireland. So James was his older brother, and James died in 1782. And his two youngest children were Elizabeth and William, and they were about 14 when he died. So his brother Robert, went to orphans court and took them and became their legal guardian. Elizabeth married James Buchanan and became the mother of James Buchanan, the president. And William was being trained in Latin at the time here by, and you'll hear about this man. Geez, the brain is gone. Well, it was a Presbyterian minister in here.
Cuthbertson.
No, the other one.
Dobbins.
Alexander Dobbin. He was trained in Latin by Alexander Dobbin, and that was important to everybody here. And then he became a Presbyterian minister. So his sister marries James Buchanan, becomes the mother of the president. He became a Presbyterian minister, and his name was William. And very early on, like 1904, he came to Chillicothe in Ohio and had a pastorate there. But he was really pretty well-known Presbyterian minister of the time. But he was a son of James. Elizabeth and he were the children of James, Robert's older brother. Okay? And I've got a thing from the orphans court if you want to look at it. So Elizabeth and William were the children of James.
Who was
And then
James married to?
Mary Patterson, I think.
What happened to their mother?
She died right after he did, and that's how they happened to come into orphans court.
Okay,
Yeah, she died not very long after he did.
thank you.
Anybody else wanna have something they wanna particularly, talk about to the group as a whole?
I have a question that you can probably answer then. There was the letter that was written about William who died in the war, in the Civil War, his arm was blown off.
Oh, Henry.
Henry,
Okay.
okay, and his arm was blown off. So how soon after that, I mean, in the letter was it William who wrote home?
Yes, and Ely and Ed know more about that. It's their branch. But this letter was written home about Henry, and it was right after he died, wasn't
He
it?
died, he was wounded in the Battle of
David knows
Atlanta
about it.
in, I think in July, I think around the 22nd of July. That's kind of on the east side of Atlanta when the battle, he was wounded. I never knew the extent of the wound, but he was wounded, and so he was sent home after a few days. I think, and his brother, W.S., or William Scott, went to see him before he went home. But he went home then there to New Concord, and he lived for about a month and died in August, about a month after the wound. And so his tombstone is there in Crooked Creek Cemetery. Yeah.
Doesn't the letter say that his arm, he indicates to
They
his
shot
brother
his
that
arm
his
off.
arm, he
Yeah.
lost his arm.
He lost his arm, and I think he had gangrene as a
Yeah.
result.
They gave him, there was supposed to be a soldier who went with him on the train, and I think the story was that the brother gave him extra money to make sure that he was taken care of, which he used for, the caregiver used for liquor, and so it took a long time for him to get home, and by that time gangrene had set in. But the letter then was from W.S., William Scott Speer, still in the Army, and his reaction over seeing his brother with the fatal wound. And in the letter, I believe it says that he wanted to go back with him, and Henry said, "No, you stay and fight." And that's
It was a very touching letter.
yes. And there's even on a website about the 78th Ohio Volunteer Infantry, and there's someplace in the book, my book maybe, a poem written by William Scott Speer's first son. He named Henry after the one who was killed in the war. And William Scott Speer's daughter-in-law wrote a poem about this incident that's very, very good and very concise.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to speak?
Why don't we break for 5 and then we'll have some musical fun.
Let me compute your numbers here. 4, 7, 9, 10, 12, 14.
A little bit too much time. Structure that's still used as a church in the entire county. So most of the older houses, churches, and I think in some of your material it said it was a woman, but I think that west of the Susquehanna River. And I should mention that the area we're in right now was originally part of one of the 3
This shorted version. Ah, yeah, okay.
So David, it's yours.
Okay, do I have time for my presentation?
I'm sorry.
Yeah. In virtue of Dale's need possibly to get away, I just want him to come up and stand by my side for 1 second. The Reverend Dale E. Williams is already a good friend, and in behalf of this Speer gathering, we want to present him a check that ensures us that we're a part of this wonderful cemetery. I made that mistake. We love you, and would you just please tell us something about your church and your cemetery and the perpetual care of it?
Right, we have begun some years ago trying to build up a perpetual care fund. And we have actually we're very fortunate, we have a gentleman in our congregation who's retired, whose hobby is investing. And he's invested in, we have an endowment fund that we are putting money into, and at the end of every year, any money we have left in our budget, we're very blessed that we end up in the black. We've ended up in the black the last 15 years in a row at our church. Extra money that we have at the end of the year, we put into this cemetery perpetual fund. Obviously, taking care of a cemetery is expensive business. Every time we have every time we need work on any of the stones, it's extremely expensive. There is a gentleman in the area who repairs gravestones, and we've had him in to repair a number of stones, and it's very expensive. But anyway, this will be a tremendous help to us, and really appreciate it. It's been wonderful getting to know Robert and getting to meet you, and I had not paid much attention to the Speer family in Lower Marsh Creek Cemetery, and now I have a connection. And
now, to kind of close out the organized activities, if we could call it organized. Tim Smith, who's I call him a docent for the battlefield. He's a local person. His address is not in Gettysburg, but it's nearby. But anyway, he has researched the history, and we've asked him to talk about the history of the local settlement here. And
take me a few minutes here to get this thing warmed up. Just in the stuff you had sent me, and I hadn't realized that your family, a lot of them moved to Guernsey County, Ohio. Just 2 weeks ago, I stayed in.
We ought to give a good round of applause to Tom and Bobby and Larry and